Sank?
Here.
Present. Mr. Carpenter?
Here.
Present. Mr. Swanson? Present. All present and accounted for. Next item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next item on the agenda is public comment. I will open the session for public comment at 6:29, actually. Any members of the public like to speak? Seeing no members of the public wishing to speak, I will close the public comment session at 6:29. Next item on the agenda is I'd like to introduce Chris Hawkins. He is our town moderator. I've asked Chris to join us. We have a bunch of new members here. Asked Chris to just talk about briefly his role and what to expect at the next public hearings that we have. The next two meetings will be public hearings, and then after that will be the first deliberative session. So, Chris, if you could introduce yourself and kind of like talk us through what to expect and what's going to happen, that would be appreciated.
Sure, and it's a great part of the job that you kind of know. You think you know what to expect, but you don't really know what to expect. So, but things generally run in fairly predictable ways. So I'm the town and school district moderator. I have been since, I think, 2014 or so. So my job, I have a couple of jobs as a moderator. First, it's an elected position. One of my jobs is to kind of moderate the deliberative session. I don't like to say run it because it's the town's meeting and I'm just there to direct traffic. So that's one big part of the job. And the other job is to oversee the elections in town. Do that in conjunction with the town clerk. So those are my two big jobs. The deliberative session, which is what Joe has asked me to address, is what used to be called town meeting. Town meeting is divided into two sessions. First is the deliberative session, where we talk about the warrant articles and voters have an opportunity to ask questions, and they can take money away from a warrant article, or they can add money to it, or leave it alone, as the case may be. They can also, in principle, make some changes to the language, but there's legal limits to what they can do in that respect. And part of my job is to work with the town's attorney to try to keep an eye on that process if people try to change the language. It's very unusual for anything really odd to happen at our deliberative sessions. If there's no big bond issues or things like that, they're generally pretty straightforward. The budget committee attends, sits up front with the town council, the school board, as the case may be. Occasionally, depending on whether or not there's a split of opinion on the budget committee, that'll get recorded on the warrant. For example, if it's 8-1 or 7-2 or however the votes turn out, people may ask why that happens. So you may be asked to address why that has happened. I personally think it's what makes deliberative session more productive and better experience all the way around is, let's say you have a warrant article where you anticipate that there's going to be questions, that you designate one or two of your members to address that, to really go to, learn up, study up on that, and be prepared to address those issues, just in case questions come up. But in general, the more kind of organized and efficient you are in advance, the more confident you project, the better the meeting is going to be, because my experience is the audience can sense if there's uncertainty or if there's confusion on your part. They will get confused and then they will get anxious, and that makes for a less productive meeting in my personal experience. So fake it till you make it is a big part of the job. But most of the time, it's pretty rare in my experience for questions to be directed to the budget committee, particularly if there's no dissenting opinion. Obviously you guys have been working very hard to understand the budget, working with the town council and the school board, make sure you understand all the ins and outs of what's going on, and that's all beneficial in the long run. Are there specific questions people have?
So the deliberative session is February 5th.
Yes,
And really, the town runs that, and then the school runs their piece.
correct.
The budget committee is there just to answer any questions.
Right,
I think my experience in the past has been really, like you say, the warrant articles, people sometimes change the amounts. Okay,
Right.
but the budget committee, by that time, is either voted to approve or not, to recommend or not recommend those warrant articles by the time we get to the deliberative session. Is that
yeah,
generally true?
that's right. It's generally put on the warrant, on the draft warrant, what the budget committee's position is. Now, it's a question we've never had to confront. If the voters significantly reduce a warrant article or increase it, they can zero it out and they can increase it, I think, up to 10% by law, but they can't make it higher than 10%. Whether the budget committee reconvenes and discusses those amendments, it's just an issue that we've never confronted. I don't know the answer to. That may be a question to direct to the town's attorney, who actually work with him, so I can ask him. But you guys, you may want to direct a question through Steve on that issue. It's rare, I can't remember. I think the school budget got increased at deliberative session a year or two ago. And I remember the town budget being increased by $15,000 maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I don't remember the budget committee reconvening to discuss those issues, but that may be something you may want to think about. Also, just because you're on the budget committee, you are free to comment. You have your voters too. Typically, what I think is better, and what I would do personally if I wanted to comment, is walk around and get in line with the rest of the public. So it makes it clear that you're not speaking as a member of the budget committee, but you're free to express whatever opinions you want to express as voters, just like anybody else. That's really a question, Joe, for you to address as the chair, but I think that's the better practice.
Okay, I know that, like, last year, I have 2 questions about last year. There was an article that the budget committee had voted against, and I just got up and said, the budget committee, made clear that the budget committee was against this.
Mm-hmm.
While we're on that topic, last year there was a warrant article that the budget committee voted to not recommend.
Mm-hmm.
And the wording on the warrant article said, recommended by the budget committee 5 to 6. So somebody would have to look at that and say, oh, this first column is those that are for it, the second column is for those that are against it.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't follow up, but my understanding, I know in the past that when the budget committee did not recommend something, it said not recommended by the budget committee.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, what they did last year, was that, I didn't push it, but was that legit for them to do, or is that, could I have really protested that?
The answer is I don't know. That's an excellent question to ask either the town or the school district attorney. That's a legal question. I don't know the answer to.
Okay.
I don't remember that.
All right.
Either.
Is that, send that to Steve and have him?
Yeah, I would relay that question through Steve or through the superintendent, depending on, or both, because they're different attorneys, different constituencies. So.
It is decided that we need to do the deliberative session by Zoom. Who makes that decision?
Well, ultimately, it's a decision that I make as a moderator, but I would consult with the town administration and the school district administration on that, like I always do. I mean, my preference is to not do it by Zoom, but that's a decision ultimately that rests with me. I hadn't given any thought. I'm hoping that we can do deliberative session live. We can just space people out. And
If the weather's bad that day, I think we have on our calendar an alternate date for the deliberative. Who makes that call? You, the town
I do.
manager? You make that call?
Yeah, that decision's committed to me by law.
Okay.
Not that
You
I
have our
relish
calendar?
it, but it is. What's that?
Do you have a copy of our calendar?
I do not.
I'll send it to you.
Yeah, that'd be great. Of course, we had the snowstorm election when the warrant article for the school fund passed, the bond passed. That was a whole statutory kerfuffle, let's call it, around that issue, and it was made clear that the moderator has the authority to postpone local elections. But if it's a statewide election, we have to get permission from the Secretary of State to postpone.
Was that was a statewide election, the last one, when we had that storm? In some towns, last
My
year?
memory is that was local only. It's 3 or 4 years ago now, right? So
And you have nothing to do with public hearings that we do, correct?
only with the deliberative session and then the actual voting day. The voting day is the second session of the town meeting. So that's the extent of my authority. It's narrow, but it's deep. My authority, basically, over elections and things like that.
Anybody have any questions on how the deliberative session's gonna go, what we do?
Okay?
Okay, all right. Thank you, Chris, appreciate it.
Sure.
The next item on the agenda is the follow-up on the library budget questions that we have, and we have Kerry Cronin, who's the new library director, and several of the trustees, and come on up and introduce yourself. And I'm not sure how we want to proceed, whether does the budget committee want to just kind of like have her walk through her budget, or do you want to go over the questions that we had sent her before?
Let her go, and then she might answer some of our questions anyway.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm Carrie Cronin. I'm the new...
Please speak up, because
Is this on? Good evening, everyone. I'm Carrie Cronin. I'm the new director of the Newmarket Public Library. I just started in August of this year, so this is my first time presenting to the Budget Committee. And I understand you have a number of questions. I've responded a couple of times in writing to the town manager and directly to the budget chair. So I had prepared some notes when I presented to the town council. I could just go over some of those increases and then answer any questions that you might have. Our fiscal year 2023 budget request is $390,246.67, which represents a 17% increase over fiscal year 2022. Some of our budget goals include increasing evening hours, adding a new part-time technology librarian position, expanding programming, and giving the staff the flexibility to be able to deliver library services off-site. We feel like that's an important part of our mission, is to meet with residents where they are. So we have just been awarded an ARPA grant through the state library. This is just an example of that, where we will be able to offer a preschool early literacy initiative at the Recreation Department and at Lamprey Health. So we're trying to bring our services off-site as much as we can to encourage greater use of the library. At the Halloween Haunt, we did a pop-up service where we were checking out books and registering residents for cards. So we're trying to be very innovative and reaching out as much as we can. And that continues to be a goal in next year's budget as well. We want to expand our collections, and we also want to expand our digital resources. As part of the pandemic, and as just part of a trend in the use of libraries, more and more digital content is of interest to residents, and we want to continue to build those resources. We also are planning to initiate a long-range planning process so that we can hear more from the community about what they'd like for their public library, so that we can be responsive and design our library services to really meet the needs of residents. So I'll just quickly go through the object codes with the increases. The salary line, object code 51100 salaries, That, due to attrition, we were able to bring one staff person who's currently at 36 hours to 40 hours a week. So that means that 2 of the positions at the library will now be full-time at 40 hours, the library directors and a librarian assistant position. So the large increase in that line is because part of the salary that was in the part-time has moved to that salary line. And then there's a 1% increase in the part-time salaries. That's 51,150. That includes funding for a new part-time technology librarian. A great deal of successful library services involves the growth of technology, and a lot of our computers are slow at the library. We've had requests to do programming, orienting people to the technology and to be able to engage in introducing emerging technologies for the community. So we really feel that bringing that expertise in will be a real asset to our service and to the community. The object codes 52200, 52300, 52500, FICA, Medicare, and retirement. Those are fixed costs which the library does not control. So you see increases in those areas, but that's across the board, across all departments. The object code 53390 programs is a 300% increase, and that is in part because I believe the programming decreased in recent budgets, perhaps due to the pandemic. And now that we're beginning to offer more programming both online and in person, we'd like to be able to increase the funding, since it had been decreased in prior years, back to a level where we can offer a wider range of services to all ages. And all of our programs are free to members of the community. So it's really a wonderful resource that supports lifelong learning for all ages within this community. The object code 54300 building maintenance is a modest increase of 13%. That's just $687, and that just reflects increased costs and unanticipated expenses that might arise in the care of maintaining an historic building. Object code 543112, equipment maintenance lease, that's a 20% increase. That is just a $400 increase to reflect increased costs and potentially future growth. The object code 55800, training and staff development, is 200% increase. That's staff training that had also been decreased in prior years. And with the pandemic, options to go to conferences and for trainings might have been a little bit more limited, but now that hopefully we're coming out of that, I know there's a surge at the moment this winter, but we're hoping to be able to engage more training opportunities for our staff. I think that's essential for this type of services that we are providing at the library. And the object code 56700, books and subscriptions, is a 17% increase. That's approximately a $7,000 increase to our books and materials line. In prior budgets, that line was decreased, and the cost of purchasing and subscribing to databases and materials only goes up. So if we are decreasing that line, we're actually losing service. So it's really important, I think, particularly where we want our collections to be current. We want them to be responsive to the support to the school system, to the children, and the curriculum, and to be up to date in all areas. So I really feel that that's an important area of growth for the library. And then equipment purchase, object code 57410, that is 67% increase. We're hoping with the addition of a new technology librarian position that we'll be able to upgrade and expand our equipment. So we will need to do some computer replacements. They haven't been done in some time. And so those are the reasons for the increases. So I'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Questions?
How much co-oping do you do with the town itself? Do you purchase any of your heating necessities, or you mentioned the equipment purchase, with updating computer systems, technology, stuff like that? Do you utilize anyone or any sources from the town, or is this all outside vendors?
We work closely with Bill Tappan, the finance director who's also the IT director. So I know that he is working to upgrade our phone system to be to make use of the fiber optic voice over IP, I guess. We have a very basic phone system that just has one line that you can call into, and it doesn't have voicemail. So he's working on that. The help desk feature of the town through a service called Back Bay out of Dover is something the library has also included in that contract. Certainly, before we change any equipment, I'll talk with Bill around his recommendations and see what's the most cost effective. Sometimes the discounts libraries can get for technology are in some cases better than what a municipality can get directly, but absolutely, we're very collaborative, and we would definitely work with Bill before we make any changes to that infrastructure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
How much is in the trust fund?
So our treasurer is here, Joan Diorio. I did send some documents to you, and I believe
There was a consolidation of accounts. It looked like it's I wasn't exactly sure how that worked.
Sure. I have the detail of the income and expenditures for the year. Do you have the list, Joan, of the balances? Joan Diorio is the treasurer for the trustees. And
Which accounts are you talking about? The PDIP?
I'm sorry, what?
You said something about accounts being consolidated?
Yeah, so somewhere in here it said, if I can find it here, that transfer.
this is the first.
Yeah. So previous 3 accounts were consolidated into one general fund, New Hampshire PDIP general fund.
PDIP, the Public Investment Pool. We had, those accounts were set up like 30 years ago, and they were divided into different categories, and we weren't using that money so much, and it didn't really, we had a search done to see whether the money that was put into those funds had restrictions as to how they could be used, and we consulted with Mrs. Knowles, who was with the Charitable Trust Division for years, and she said that the money that was in those accounts, and in fact in all the accounts, were free and clear of any restrictions. We could use them whatever way we wanted, and it just seemed better to consolidate the 3 different funds for books, technology, and equipment into one general fund, just for bookkeeping's sake.
Okay, so now that if I understand correctly, there's just one account, one trust fund account?
There's one, no, we have one account with the New Hampshire PDIP. We have a money market account, and we have 2 CDs at 2 different banks. Those are, that and our checking account make up all our trust funds.
So, okay, so there are 3 accounts right now.
We have one account with New Hampshire Public Deposit Investment Pool. We have a money market account. We have 2 CDs in Piscataqua. We have one in Piscataqua Savings Bank and one in People's Bank.
Can you tell me how much okay, so the PDIP account has $64,000 in it?
It did at the date that I sent that out, that the report was made, yes.
So it was roughly that, okay. And Okay, and the money market has how much in it?
Hold on just a second.
What I'm trying to get at is, how much money is in the trust fund for the library?
I don't have
Trust
that.
funds.
The total amount of funds that we have as of December was $164,471.12.
So, so what is there an overriding rule as to what the trust fund monies can be used for versus going to the town for?
Well, okay, let's see. We use the trust fund money to take care of emergencies that come up, like we have a situation where we need to do some roof repairs. We would like to see about making our front access a little bit more ADA compliant for people who come in, because the doors are heavy, the ramp is hard to keep clear in the wintertime, and a lot of times the things that we use the money on are projects that don't rise to the level of capital fund.
So I'm a little confused on that one. I thought there was monies being put into capital reserves on the town side for specifically wheelchair access and whatever for the library.
Well, we have several different projects that we were considering, but we're trying to see what would be the most effective for the use of our money.
Okay, well, I guess, why wouldn't you consolidate them all and say,
We
hey,
didn't,
this is what we have to do?
the only thing that we consolidated were funds that were in the public.
No, I'm talking
deposit.
about on the wheelchair access and ADA access. Why wouldn't you just combine that all into one capital reserve account request? Say, look, we need to do this. We'd like to do it in phases and set aside X amount of dollars each year for doing that. As opposed to saying, okay, I'm going to do something with capital reserve fund from the town side. I'm going to do something with my trust fund money, and then I have a regular budget, general fund budget from the town.
I'm not sure what you're asking.
I understand that, but it sounded to me the way she worded it, that they were also going to use some trust fund money to do some other work that they didn't put in with that. I'm saying, well, why don't you just consolidate this?
We use this as when emergencies come up more than anything else.
Oh, okay, so beat me up if I'm
I'm not gonna.
being too.
No, there's no
Okay.
need to beat you up. My question is, of the 164,000, generally in trust funds, you have restricted and unrestricted funds.
I understand that, but we did a search of what the funds were, because a lot of this comes from money that was donated years ago, and unfortunately we didn't have the greatest of records. We didn't know where most of it was from, and that's why the previous treasurer consulted with Terry Knowles at the Charitable Trust Division at the Secretary of State.
So you received a ruling from the Charitable Trust Division that allows you to consolidate commingled funds where at one time restricted funds with funds that are unrestricted.
Basically, we have a letter to that effect from Terry Knowles, yes.
Okay, so at this point in time, the 164,000 you have in the trust funds, all of them are unrestricted? Is that the rule?
Yes, they are.
The ruling?
Yes. I've been treasurer for, I guess, going on 2 years, going on 3 years. And in the time that I have been a trustee, I don't think we had any donations that were restricted, other than that they would say you need to use it by a certain time, but not that it be used for a specific purpose necessarily, no.
And what is the makeup of the trustees group?
The makeup of the trustees.
Yeah, I mean.
We have
I-
5 trustees, and now they are all appointed. At one time, we had 1 elected trustee, and there was a condition in the will, not the will, in the deed, that when certain conditions changed, that all trustees would be appointed. The library itself was created by the New Hampshire Mill Association, or I may not have the right name, but it was a private organization. It wasn't created by the town, but it was donated to the town with certain ideas that we had to follow. So,
Are you able to modify the makeup of the trustees?
in what way?
Well, I think the town is contributing significantly to the library operations, which is fine, I have no problem. Okay. But I think that the town representation should have some representation on trustees. And whether it's a non-voting one, I'm fine with that. But it's my opinion that, personal opinion, that because the town contributes significantly to the library, that the town should have some oversight or as to what's going on.
Well, I don't know what to say about that, because you'd have to look at the deed, and it was a legal document. For the longest time, I was the elected trustee, and then the town manager said that whatever the conditions had been met to have all the trustees appointed. And that was probably about 5 years ago. So I don't know.
And the appointee process, if I assume this correctly, is that
You fill out
somebody volunteers, says, I'd like to serve on there's an opening, I'd like to serve on it. And, they submit their name to the town manager or whatever, and the town council says, approves it, right?
Correct.
Okay, that's a process. Yeah.
Now that your funds aren't restricted, is there any restriction as to how much you can spend of the balance in any particular year?
That I don't know. I
Typically
don't
no
know
more than-
that, but we try not to spend any more than we, you know.
What's your policy on it?
That's a good question.
Ordinarily,
So
5%, no more than 5% of a trust's value would be expended in any particular fiscal year.
Mhm.
Otherwise, the trust will be diluted quickly.
We've tried to be fairly conservative about how we use our money. And that, in fact, that was one of the reasons why we consolidated the 3 PDIP funds, because in the past few years, interest rates have not been very good, and it just seemed to make more sense to have it all in one, so that we could possibly earn a little bit more interest.
This is not
Yes.
a place to ask about what those policies are. But it would be interesting to see if the board
It-
The
it-
library
it's-
board has policies on that.
I think it sort of is in that the town is, given them a significant portion of their budget, $390,000, okay? And the town is doing very little oversight of the money that they're requesting. The town's kind of like just approving it, saying, here, you request this money here, you can have it. I think that the budget committee has the authority or right to ask that question. How are you spending the money? How's it being allocated?
I
Yeah.
think
I would like to know. I think it's important to understand that, because whatever you have for a trust fund, people are giving you money to put in trust. They're expecting it's going to survive. It's going to be used, but it's going to survive. It's not going to be spent.
Has there been any sign that it's not being used correctly? or-
Yeah, I
Um,
wanted to chime in if I may, just, I don't want to step on
No,
your
go right ahead.
I'm Sarah Stinson. I'm the newest member of the trustees. I work at the university library where I'm the digital collections coordinator. And to your earlier question about the makeup of our board, we do have very deep library experience. There's a retired director and people who bring a variety of experience to the group, so that's helpful. I know that's not to your exact point of the question, which has its roots in oversight. But as you were saying, we are very transparent. We keep excellent records. Our minutes are available on our website, and I think our budget has been approved in the past because we've been good stewards of it, and we serve the community well. We've had very modest asks, and the town is obligated to fund the library. So the tenor of your question suggesting that you're doing us a favor, I want to push back a little bit on. And
The library is doing the town a favor by providing resources to everyone.
yeah.
It's,
It does not, and that's why we are very conservative and careful with it, and we have reached out. You've probably heard Joan mention Terry Knowles' name before. We met with her recently. She is a consultant. She worked for the New Hampshire Attorney's Office for almost 40 years and has a lot of library experience, and we looked to her for some guidance as well as other libraries about how to manage these funds, and really our watch phrase is to be very careful, both how it's managed. You can see it being in 2 CDs and this with the interest rates being what they are. I mean, we're spending it and we're investing it very cautiously. So that's not as specific as perhaps what you're looking to hear.
No. Okay.
but the
If I may.
director,
My opinion, the library trustees, I would really hope that, yes, the majority of them have library experience, and know that. But I would also assume that you don't have a whole lot of experience with negotiating a contract to go paint, maintenance of buildings, to go put a new roof on the building. Like I said, you spent $34,000 for painting, which, may be right, may not be right, okay? And my gut feeling tells me that I have a bunch of trustees that have a library background, but they don't really have a background in
I see what you're saying.
negotiating a contract for
Which
paint.
is why we work so closely with the town facilities manager.
that was a question that I
specifically
have.
during that time, Greg, help me with his last name.
Marls.
He was our go-to person. We frequently reached out to him and also invited him in. And in fact, the quote that he urged us towards was about $68,000. He was very keen to have us take a historical preservation tactic, and we were reticent.
And that's
So-
a perfectly good, explanation. Well, that's why it cost $34,000.
Yes, there was more than just paint. I was shocked at that number as well. I do a lot of my own house maintenance, and I thought, I'll paint the library.
It was more
But
than paint.
it was more than paint. There was a lot of maintenance done as well. And in context to that $68,000 initial bid, it certainly felt less expensive.
Okay, that's good.
Thank you. Please.
Yes, I know I'm in favor of the library. I'm just trying to
Thank you.
understand the financial aspect of it. I know many libraries do fundraising and sales and so forth. Does the Newmarket Library do that?
We do, and Carrie may be able to better to speak to that. We have an active Friends group and book sales throughout the year. So if we can
Is
answer
that
very
reflected
specifically.
in the financial statements? Because I can't seem to find that.
The Friends are a separate 501c3, so they maintain their own financial documents. They're the fundraising arm of the library, so they do they do quarterly book sales, and they have a membership drive that they do. So they pay for our museum passes, they pay for,
And so they maintain their own books? and
they
that
do.
Money is not transparent to the public as to what it's used for?
They don't have documents that, the trustees supply financial reports to the finance department of the town monthly, and then they supply a detailed accounting for all residents in the annual report, but the Friends are a separate organization, so I'm sure if the information was asked for, they could provide that, but their revenue is within a few $1,000s. It's not a significant, it's not like a trust fund. It's correct. They are. So they would fill out whatever documents are needed as a 501c3, but they don't have the same reporting requirements.
I'm just interested in the transparency to the town as to how much is being raised by the Friends of the Library and where that is being spent. That's all.
Certainly.
Trying to understand that. That
Sure.
doesn't seem to be visible to the public.
I think if you were to go to the library, you would see exactly where the money from the Friends is being spent, because they have bought new bookcases, they bought the rug that is in the children's room, they helped set up a space in the main stack area that is a young adult section that was not there before.
And maybe more to your point, I'll just add that there is a level of transparency that can be found in our meeting minutes, because the Friends, a member of the Friends Association does come to our monthly meetings to give a report, which includes the balance of their funds, and when we opt to use those funds, we make a motion, and so that type of information can be found in our minutes. I don't know if that helps, but we certainly are committed to the transparent use.
I just want to say, the library has multiple museum passes that the public can use. Anybody who is a card carrier can use it. Almost all of those passes are provided by the Friends group, and they're not, they're for the whole year.
I just have one question, comment. I mean, I think you referred to the increase as modest. You know, I kind of felt like a 17% increase, 62% increase in salaries is not modest. I mean, I think that's actually a significant increase. And I'm not trying to judge it one way or the other, but I don't think that was modest. So in the process, who does have oversight over that? Is it a town council question that?
That's what I'm gonna get. There's
No one.
the trustees, okay? When there's an opening or a trustee, somebody volunteers and the town council appoints that person. It's not,
And so the trustees have full authority to,
then it's really the trustees and the director that,
But they make the proposal to the town, and they have to, I assume, the town council and town manager review the proposal to the trustees.
Yes, we presented the budget proposal to the town council in October.
There was a statement made that the town is obligated to fund the library. Are they obligated to fund whatever the trustees ask for?
I made that statement.
No.
I'm afraid I did.
She did.
Yes, sir.
I don't know your name, I'm sorry.
Sarah, my name is Sarah Stinson.
Yes.
Will you restate your question?
You said the town is obligated to fund the library. I think we have a responsibility to fund it, but obligation implies that whatever you ask for, the town is obligated to fund it.
No, I meant no such obligation, so I'm glad for your question, so I can clarify that. The budget process is a conversation, and we work very closely with the town. There's a process. We meet those deadlines. Carrie's been a great champion of the library. And so we engage with the processes as they're made. We certainly don't just put forth carte blanche requests as demands.
Okay, so your term obligation then is not obligated.
There's
I think we
there's
are
a
more-
legal
I-
framework where
I
towns in
believe
New
we
Hampshire
should fund
support
the
their
library.
libraries, much that how they support their schools, right?
I believe we should fund the library, and I believe that we are, morally obligated to support the library. I think it's on the behalf of the citizens of the town.
Statutorily, New Hampshire, there's an obligation to fund it.
And thank you. And
Is
that
it-
It's not saying to fund it, that whatever.
Okay, and I was just trying to understand what your term meant. Okay, so it is
Within
a
the legal
conversation.
framework.
It is discussed with the town manager.
yes.
The town manager said he had no oversight of the library, so that's why I was concerned that it sounded like it was a conversation. You're saying it's a conversation. His statement implied that it was a monologue and that he didn't participate. Oh, they have,
Right.
Yeah,
the
town
budget.
council does not have.
no, the
Yeah, it's a bit
town
nuanced.
council has the right to appoint the trustees. And beyond that, he indicated that he had no oversight of the library in any matter. And so it sounded to me like it was not a conversation, a discussion like would happen between the normal department head and the town manager. So that I was trying to understand that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we're glad for the opportunity to come in and talk with you and learn about your process and invite you into ours, so that it does feel like more of a conversation. Certainly not a monologue.
So as far as grants and the availability of grants or research into grants, is there any active effort going on to sort of make sure that we know about grants that are available? Like in the technology area, as an example. Is anybody trying to figure that out? Government grants.
I'm not sure if the town as a whole is pursuing grants at this time in the area of technology. We are actively at the library involved in 3 grants in the new year. And a proposal that we wrote for early literacy that I mentioned, and then we were also named in proposals submitted by other communities. So the Plastow Public Library put one in for a community read that we'll be able to offer to Newmarket in the spring. And then we were included in a grant proposal by the Durham Public Library for several surrounding towns to bring in a communications consultant to work with all of us around marketing and ideas for how to reach the underserved members of our community, non-users, and to be able to more effectively communicate our message about what we have to offer in terms of value. So we're looking forward to being part of those, but those are 3 grant opportunities that we'll be participating in. Certainly we're open to other kinds of funding, and we'll look into those as the opportunities arise. But that's a great question. I appreciate it, and we'll definitely keep it on our radar. You're welcome. Are there any other questions I can answer?
I just want to understand the 164 that you have in the trust funds. That does not include the 108,000 that you have in the capital reserve, correct? That's separate.
Correct.
It's separate. This is all the money, the 164,000 plus is money that was donated or granted or gifted to the library or earned. It's not taxpayer money at all.
Okay, so some of the repairs that you're talking about, that will come from the 108,000 capital reserve?
I think that the CIP projects have to meet a certain financial threshold. So the trustees are looking at putting in an additional exterior door in order to improve accessibility and developing the side of the property as kind of a pocket park, so there'll be greater use of the outdoor space. Those would reach the threshold to qualify as a capital project.
Do you have a listing of what your projects are?
Yes, they were in our CIP request.
Okay, thank you.
There are 3. You're welcome.
Any additional questions?
I don't have a question for the ladies here. I have a comment though, because we had said something about grants and the transparency of the grants earlier in the year. I'm not sure where we ended up with that. We're talking about a few grants here. Understanding we can't count on that obviously in the budgeting process, but is there any sort of conclusion there, Joe, as to how those grants are going to show up, if there's going to be any transparency there at all? And I don't even know how much these grants are. I mean, they could be a couple $1,000.
So there's a requirement for the trustees to have a public hearing for any grants over $5,000, I believe, and our grant is just over 10. It's 10,400 roughly, so we are scheduling a public hearing to accept those funds the beginning of January.
I didn't know that.
Now we do.
Any other questions? I thank you guys very much for coming tonight. I know it was your day off, but I do appreciate you coming in. I think you've explained questions that I have.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. So the next 2 items on the agenda are general discussions amongst ourselves about the town budget and the school budget. Next Monday, we will have our public session on the town budget. I have invited Steve and Bill to attend that. I don't know if they will. I assume they will. I would expect that the next meeting too, we might have some information on if there's any bonding issue. I think Steve said that there may be one bonding issue that they were considering. I don't know if they've done that. And then the week after that, January 10th, I believe, when we do the school budget, I believe we will have some warrant articles. Is that? We should have them by then. So anyway, general discussion on the town budget. Does anybody have any questions, comments, or things that they'd like to discuss or bring up
Not here.
to Steve? I too, I guess, a little concerned about moving more towards a leasing type program, leasing programs versus, like you say, the old-fashioned way to put the money aside and do it. That obligates us, I guess, in the future, unless they want to give up the equipment, which they sounds like that they will have that in the contract that they can give up the equipment if they want to. I don't know. it has implications, I believe, for default budgets. Default budget's gonna be bigger and, I don't know. Next question.
I just think the statement that they're gonna borrow money to subsidize this, in reality, I think what they're doing is they're putting it in their actual budget. You know, that's gonna be part of their expenditures. There are towns that still do it where if they wanna buy a fire truck, it's a warrant article. That's how they purchase it. You know, so, I mean, with Newmarket, basically what they're doing is they're saying we're underfunding this, so therefore, I think one of the items was $48,000 a year lease. They're gonna build that in the budget every year till term end. And, you know, and in the meantime, they're gonna probably build some more 40s, 50s to take care of the other equipment that they're looking for. So, I mean, one way or another, it's gonna get paid for. It's just not gonna be in a CIP any longer, capital reserve. That's the way I understand it.
I think that's correct, and I think that the issue here is that there is a change from saving money to pay for something when we need it in the future to let's not put any money aside, let's wait till we need it, and then we'll lease it. And the concern I have is unless this is handled well, that under the old scheme of having a trust fund that you know, or a reserve fund that you put aside, you had to make the hard decision of whether you're going to buy an A or a B, because you couldn't do both of them. And with leasing, it makes it an easy decision. We'll buy A and B because we can. And I'm concerned about the fact that that's essentially we're kicking the can down the road in terms of not paying now for what we're going to need in the future. But worse than that, there may be two cans down the road. And that has an implication on what the tax rate's going to be for the town down 5, 8 years from now.
I can understand the philosophy of leasing so that you can stabilize trends over time, but it seems like you could still do that if you were funding your CIP properly, that you'd be able to ensure the tax rates level without having to, even by paying off leases using that money if you wanted to. I mean,
Right, but unfortunately, the statement's been made, and I think that Roger can attest that the CIP has been poorly underfunded.
Right.
oh yeah, there's no question.
So, I mean, this way here, it's not a question of underfunding anything. I mean, if you legitimately need that vehicle, and that's what the lease is gonna cost you, then that's what you're building into the budget. And, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that some of the CIP budgets or some of the CIP numbers used to be in the $300,000 to $500,000 range for the town. You know, they've gone away from doing that with the police vehicles. They're just gonna buy as needed, which makes sense because it's a lot less of an expenditure. But, you know, I can see where in order to keep the equipment operational, not necessarily new, but operational, this is probably the way that they've got to do it.
From my experience in Gary, what we obviously did was we managed things based on just as you mentioned, you have a certain amount of funding, we had a certain level that we established in terms of the indebtedness of the community and what percentage we would permit of the indebtedness of the community. What's happening with the lease option is that unless they're accounting for that, in other words, you're signing a lease, now you're signing a long-term debt. the same thing as taking out a loan, except paying for it. We're sort of playing games with the semantics of it, but at the end of the day, it's the same thing. How are we accounting for that? Are we recognizing the liability in the town's books or not? You know, it's one thing to say, well, we just, you know, we plug it in as a annual expense that goes into the lease expenses, but whether you're borrowing money or you're doing it that way where you're buying equipment on a lease, it doesn't really matter. It's the same thing. But the question is, are we being upfront with what that means in terms of the town's books? But we're certainly going against, you know, the CIP concept of looking long term.
Mhm.
You know, if it's in the CIP and you recognize it as part of the CIP and so forth, but the funding mechanism is going to be a lease versus, you know, a statutory debt. They're both statutory debts. But I think I agree with you. I don't think it's very upfront and honest about how you're doing it. Not the way that we normally would. You would do it if you were to vote on, we're going to buy the truck. It's going to cost $400,000, and we're going to either save money for it or we're going to pay for it in a bonding.
Furthermore, I don't think we're being consistent in how we treat this across the different departments. In some cases, it's built into their budget, like the police are essentially building it into the budget. In some cases, some of it's built into the budget and some of it's coming out of reserve funds. In other cases, it's all coming out of reserve funds. And I don't think there's good transparency to that, and I don't think there's a statement of how we really should be bookkeeping this, and are we, properly recognizing it.
Use this method just to, get some more idea about long-term impacts and such, or ways they counteracted any negative impacts?
Well, it appears that the impact is relatively easy to see. We looked at if you extrapolate it over the next 10, 15 years, there's going to be a point, I think we've reached a point in around years 7, 8, 9, 10, where we're going to have a problem as a town with the fire equipment specifically. Because the reserve really isn't a reserve. It's funding the lease. Leasing's not the problem, and it appears that the method they're using to pay for the lease is perfectly legal, but it's probably, to your point, not as transparent to the taxpayers as it needs to be. And more importantly, in 10 years we're going to have big issues because we're going to have multiple pieces of equipment that are going to have to be replaced, and at $50,000 a year in a reserve fund, it's really not a reserve. That's depleted every year to pay a lease. Now you have to pay for two pieces of equipment that, at that point, if you use the same numbers then, $100,000, which it's not going to be the same amount of money. It's going to require $125,000 to pay for those two pieces. You got a real issue.
Then what would be the solution then? What can we do instead?
That's a good question. Obviously, you've got to do proper reserves. It's the solution.
Progress. Like if I recall, the fire, what we're putting into the capital reserve for the fire basically just about pays the lease. Like we're really not increasing the reserve at all.
I think we're to the positive, like $2,000.
Yeah, some meager amount of money. So we're not, we're abandoning that.
Right.
And I mean, I'm just super curious about the non-appropriation clause in the lease. I mean, I'm not a leasing expert and nobody can really answer the question, but you would think if you lease something and you're allowed to give it back, that there's a cost there for that somehow. You would think, but I don't know.
I'm sure there's a cost in the interest rate that you pay.
Right, whatever the cost of the lease is,
sure.
That seems like a clause that would carry some, financial burden. You would think.
And I think Joe brought up the default budget. I'm not 100%, but I'm fairly certain that because those items are not approved by the voters, by the by the public body, I can't remember the terminology, if the default budget would happen to be, to go through, then the town would not be able to, the increase in the default budget would not include those lease items, so therefore, the town would be
No,
even more
I believe I
dire.
asked Steve that question, and he said that it would be considered a contractual obligation, and that they would include it in the default budget unless they wanted to specifically get out of the lease.
They should really double check that, because I know with the school transportation contracts that we go into that are multi-year contracts, they are not included in the default budget, so.
Yeah, no, I think that's correct.
As of
I
2
believe
years
that
ago.
Steve thought there was but it cannot be an obligation, because if so, it is in violation of the fact that it
No,
has, you know, they're constructed with an ability for the town to not pay for it, so it's not an obligation. I don't think it would be in the default budget, and I
It was
think that
changed a
would
couple
be
years
a
ago
problem.
to the default budget calculations. It's pretty explicit about what can be included now.
Okay, so, I don't know, so that becomes an issue opposite of what I was thinking before. I was thinking, okay, it's a contractual obligation, you know, it's gonna be in the default budget, now it's not gonna be there, so that's okay.
Yeah, and again, I'm not a lawyer, so, you know, or a tax official or accountant, or so, but,
Okay, so
definitely, we should understand it better than we do.
in regards to the town's 22-23 budget, I think, you know, there may be some concerns about leasing and what might happen further down the line, but in regards to the 22-23 budget for the town as is, are there any issues with the proposed amount? I don't have it in front of me what the proposed amount was. Okay, so next Monday when we
Yep.
do the town budget, I'm assuming that everybody's gonna be happy with what the library asked for. They're gonna get their money in.
It doesn't seem like we have any choice about the library.
No, we do. Again, you could propose a bottom line budget and cut the library's money out and say, you know, recommend to Steve, cut the library. We're not gonna do that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not a fan of cutting the library, I just,
The budget committee has the right to recommend a bottom line budget and recommend to the town manager, if it's less than what he's asked for, recommend to him we have to cut that. Now, whether he does and the town council does, that's entirely up to them. You have an issue or?
No, I don't.
something?
Okay.
I was
So-
just trying to understand more of the process.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, can we recommend to the town manager then that he increases the reserve for the fire equipment?
It would be a recommendation from the budget committee to the town manager and the town council, you know, here are some issues or concerns that we have. One of the things.
We could recommend a budget increase for funding those capital reserves, certainly. I think there's a limit of what we can go up and down of
Up to
10%.
10%.
Yeah, but we could certainly do that and recommend where they put those funds.
I personally would not recommend, like to recommend, oh yeah, Steve, go increase your budget.
Well,
That's up to
we're
the
not-
group here.
listen, nobody wants to spend more money, that's for sure, but I think you got a problem. You really do. And it could be a dire problem if, you know, a couple of things didn't go the right way.
Well, yeah, the objective is to stabilize the funding.
I'm sorry, Brian.
That's really
I
what it
could-
comes down to,
I
is
couldn't hear.
stabilizing
Brian, what were
the
you saying?
funding.
And also spending the money now would be seen as a lot hurt than having to spend it 10 years down the line when it's suddenly an issue.
An option for us is to approve the budget as he's proposed, and then also include in that some recommendations that say specifically, you know, the budget committee is concerned about leasing, you know, the impact of leasing 5-10 years down the road here, and, you know, however we word that,
Yeah.
whatever. I would also consider saying, the think the town should have some kind of representation on the trustees, whether it's a voting position or just a advisory, kind of like what they do with the
I agree.
town council.
Me-
Just so that they can cover their butt or whatever.
Should the budget committee decide to do that, next year it may be an entirely different committee, and
will
it
be
may not,
entirely
and it may not, or will likely be, and it may not even get remembered or questioned again, so it's something worth considering
Yeah.
whether this body wants to do it.
I mean, one possible solution to the funding of the reserve is if you look forward, like in the fire example, I think 3 years out, it doubles. So one solution might be to at least be proactively increasing the reserve marginally so that when we get to that year, we're not going to get clobbered, right?
That would be a
So
great.
we're not putting the $1 million in there that they want, but we're doing something to spread this out so that there's no big pothole.
They may have already, Steve may have already considered that too, but I think that would be a great example or whatever suggestion to include within if we have a recommendation.
Yeah, okay. Well, I might take the fire department example and maybe
And
think
write it
about
up?
what the right number is.
That
Sure.
would be a great example.
So this is just a question. Obviously, our work is done, soon, and then obviously we then obviously go into the town elections and so forth, and then we'll constitute another budget committee after that. But once we, as you suggested, we approve the budget, and then we have a list of things that we're concerned with. Is it within the budget committee's sphere to, in between approving the budget and coming up with the next budget committee, that we actually meet and talk about those areas of concern, so we can present a dialogue with the town that's a little bit more in depth while we have this break in activity?
Yeah, we have a couple more meetings between, and then we have one at the end of March, and then
And the new group.
there's a final one at the end of March. Yeah.
So that might be the thing to do, is to put in some period of time where we get back into this and we think about it a little bit more, and we come up with the words that we want to share with the town council and the town manager.
Moving on to the school budget. Any questions, comments, concerns about the proposed school budget? 25 million, 24 million? $25,233,000.
Something that I've been wondering is, obviously, the school is more skewed towards salaries, employees and everything. And I guess one of my questions would be, if there's a way to find out over the last 5 years where we were at with full-time employees, say 5 years ago, and where we are now. Because I understand that, that there's these grants that come along to put this person in this spot, that person in another spot, then the grant funding goes away, but we don't necessarily lose that spot. I think they were only looking at a couple of people increase in this new budget.
In total, they're cutting like 8 positions,
Okay.
7 or 8 positions, right? In
Now,
total.
the caveat to that is they're cutting 8, but does that include the services that at one time were full-time employees, lunch people, custodians? You've cut those, yes, potentially because you've gone and you've contracted the services out. So, you're not, it's not apples to apples, is I guess what I'm saying.
Yeah, if the headcount's the same and you've outsourced
And
part
you've
of the thing,
outsourced,
then you really have increased headcount
yes,
effectively.
that's, yeah, thank you.
Well,
Yeah.
it is 8.3 FTEs
Over
reduced this year from
total.
last.
Reduce?
Correct. Because of custodial and lunch cafeteria personnel reductions, or non-hires, I guess would be the, because we haven't been able to fill the positions.
But the professional,
Professional services has gone up because
the
that's where the
pro-
funding.
no, professional educational people, education is essentially constant, is that correct? Headcount?
I would have to check.
People doing the teaching is what
I-
I'm trying to get.
I know, and I would have to check. I mean, there are, a 0.4 math increase or 0.2
Yeah.
reduction. So I honestly don't know the exact numbers of
Yeah.
of FTEs for people
It was my
actually
im-
doing instructional services.
My
that are
impression that the
using.
instructional education was pretty much constant.
I think it's fairly constant.
Yeah, I'm sorry, a little bit with you. On people count, if you include the contracted services people, is the total number of people working higher or less?
I can't answer that directly because we are contracting out to have this school cleaned and at a certain level. So whether they bring in 100 people to do it in an hour, right? But we're hiring out enough people to do the job that were previously in the budget to do. Right. So we previously budgeted for 8 people to do custodial work, say, and now we're hiring an outside company to do the work that those 8 people would be doing. So,
So the dollars didn't.
So the dollars should be similar. I don't know, based on, salaries or retirement benefits or whatever, whether it's an increase or decrease in aggregate, but not as completely as I'd like to answer that, but we're not hiring 8 people. We're hiring to clean the school at this level of cleanliness.
Bottom line, the dollars have gone up, so, of that, is it?
You'd have to get a breakdown of professional services to see exactly how much of that is going towards custodial and lunch services.
So was it 300, the 300,000, 336,000 for level service budget? Is that what that means to continue the services that were being done before?
Yes, level services would be the same level from last year to this year.
Did that answer your question? Or any other questions, comments on the school budget?
What does the school do for projecting, its population further than the next couple of years out? Does it do any longer range planning on that regard?
There's companies we hire out for that, or we contract out that do estimates. I'm not sure how far out they go, whether it's 5 years or 3 years or 10 years. I honestly don't know. Certainly try to find out if you want to know how far out we estimate.
It would be nice to know. I only can compare with the town I lived in for 30 years. We had a guy who did that tracking. He was probably 98% accurate, and he would plan out 15 to 20 years.
Uh-huh.
Really, really good statistician. So I just don't know whether you guys are doing anything like that.
What
We-
would that,
We do hire a company to help with that.
Yeah, this was a guy who did it for free. He did it because he liked to do it.
Does you want to move to Newmarket, or?
Yeah, I can't expect that, but, the point is that actually we were able to long-term plan building construction projects and things like that. Once you get the sense that this thing's that sharp, but, you'd have a longer-term plan as a result of the visibility it provided.
Mhm.
So it's more of a question as to whether you have that type of visibility. And then from your historical, how accurate that visibility had proven to be.
Now, Try to find out how far out we estimate.
We just spent $40 million with no state funding to.
Yeah.
So they won't be doing any more building for a while.
No, I don't think they would be either, but, we take a look at what we've got for utilization, and, we're down, whatever it is, in terms of, we're down 80, 88 students or something like that, but that's a small percentage. But what's the long-term trend? Build these buildings, and then to find 20 years later they're empty?
Any other questions, comments on the school budget? So next next Monday is the town public hearing, like I say, which we will vote on the bottom line budget number. And then the week after that is the school. If you have any questions, comments, or whatever that we need to get to the school or the town, doing PDQ.
In the interim, we can send email.
Yes.
Okay. You're going to share the email exchange.
Yes,
That
I'll fill the board in. There has been some email between Mike Cahill, our state representative, and Ned and I, and to Dr. Gibbons about the impact of vouchers and that program. I just looked at it briefly. It was a lot of it went over my head. I'll pass it along, I'll condense it, pass it along to everybody. But
There's a lot to digest. Essentially, it boils down to the decrease in enrollment that has significantly impacted that state aid to the tune of $329,000 or whatever. There's a couple other factors, but that's the biggest factor.
And it's decrease in state aid, but the school requirements aren't going to go decrease though. So impact to the taxpayers. Okay, next agenda item was the meeting minutes from actually November 27th, I believe it was. 29th.
Right.
Yeah, I wrote 26th on the thing here, it's 29th.
Motion to approve the budget committee meeting minutes of November 9th, 2021.
Motion.
Second.
And who did second? Ed? Okay. Any comments, questions on the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes from November 29th, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I would abstain. I was here.
Oh, okay. Let's see, wait. Abstain. Okay. We don't have the meeting minutes from December 6th. We should have that maybe for the next meeting. Okay.
But that's the one I missed. I thought we were voting on.
Oh, you missed the December 6th one? And,
Right. Yeah,
Right.
sorry. So I would have.
Okay, so you were.
I thought we were voting on that. Okay.
Oh, you have meeting minutes changes?
No.
Okay. Other business. Well, I have something. I have an apology that I need to make to this group. At our last meeting, I made an inappropriate comment about when I referred to Republicans, and so I do need to apologize to the group for that. Totally inappropriate. We are a nonpartisan group. Our responsibility is for the taxpayers of Newmarket, and party affiliations or whatever have no place here. So I do apologize to the group for that. As soon as I said it, I said, oh, poop. I shouldn't have said that. I do apologize to the group. Won't do it again. Any other business?
Motion to adjourn?
Yeah, next meeting will be next Monday, public hearing on the town,
That's 6:30?
at 6:30 here. So motion to adjourn from Mike,
Second.
second from Gary. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.